The late afternoon sun burned low over the dusty frontier town, casting long shadows across the wooden boards of the auction yard. A crowd had gathered, murmuring and shifting impatiently, some with curiosity, others with a strange mix of pity and judgment. At the center of it all, a young woman stood on the raised platform, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the hem of her plain dress. She was heavier than most women in town, and whispers rippled through the spectators like a wind through dry grass. No one wanted to step forward, no one wanted to claim her, and the silence grew heavier with each passing moment. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the crowd. Faces looked away, some sneering, some avoiding her gaze altogether. She had heard rumors of this kind of treatment before, whispers of mockery, of being judged for the way her body looked rather than the person she was. But she had never imagined it would feel like this, standing alone under the blazing sun, the wooden boards of the auction stage creaking beneath her. She tried to keep her chin high, to appear composed, but every slam of the auctioneer's hammer reminded her that she was nothing more than a curiosity to most. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a crooked hat and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat and began calling out her supposed virtues: strong arms, capable hands, good for work. His words trailed into silence as bidders hesitated, turning their eyes elsewhere, counting their coins instead of showing interest. The young woman's cheeks burned, not from the sun, but from the sting of rejection she had already known would come. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, wishing she could disappear into the dust that swirled at her feet. From the edge of the crowd, a figure appeared, moving with a quiet confidence that drew glances from a few curious onlookers. A widowed Apache, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years lived hard and fast under the sun, stood apart from the rest. His dark eyes swept over the auction yard, lingering on the young woman with an intensity that made her stomach flip. There was no mockery in his gaze, no judgment, only a steady, patient consideration. He adjusted the worn leather straps of his coat and took a slow step forward, causing a ripple of surprise to pass through the crowd. Whispers began to rise. No one had expected anyone to pay attention to her, let alone a man like him. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and leather. The young woman's pulse quickened. She had seen him watching before, on the outskirts of town, passing through like a shadow between the buildings. But she had never imagined he would step into the open, into this spectacle that had made her feel exposed and unwanted. Every eye seemed to turn toward him now, and a hush fell over the auction yard as the people waited, as if sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. The auctioneer's voice rose again, attempting to regain control of the scene. "Who'll give the first bid for the young woman?" his words echoed, but there were no hands raised. Faces shifted uncomfortably. Some cleared their throats, hoping someone else would act. The young woman's stomach knotted tighter with every passing moment. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the silent judgment pressing in from all sides. And yet, through it all, the Apache remained still, his eyes unwavering, watching her with a curiosity that neither mocked nor pitied. The crowd began to stir with a mixture of disbelief and gossip. A few old men muttered under their breaths, shaking their heads at the apparent audacity of the widowed Apache. Women whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances at the young woman on the stage, some with envy, some with sympathy. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break, and the young woman felt it tighten around her chest. She could almost hear the silent question echoing in every corner of the yard: why would he be interested in her, when no one else dared to even look? For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The clatter of hooves from a passing wagon faded, the chatter of the crowd dimmed, and the sun hung low and golden, illuminating every freckle on her face and every crease of worry on the auctioneer's brow. She couldn't read his mind, but the way he held himself calm, deliberate, unshaken by the judgment of others made her wonder if he saw something no one else did, something worth more than the whispers and the empty hands. The auctioneer squinted at the Apache, trying to gauge whether he would make a move. His voice rose, now tinged with nervousness. "Well, we have a bid. Step up if you mean it, sir." The young woman's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had feared and longed for all at once, a strange mix of hope and anxiety twisting inside her. The crowd leaned in, sensing the shift in the wind, as if the rules of this dusty, sun-baked world might bend for just a heartbeat. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, each footfall striking the wooden boards with authority. The young woman's heart raced, unsure whether to feel relief or apprehension. She had never been chosen like this, never been seen as more than her size, more than the assumptions people made before they even knew her name. And yet here he was, a man from the edge of the desert, someone who carried the wildness of the plains in his eyes, and he was looking at her as if she mattered. A hush fell again, heavier than before. The wind tugged at the edges of her dress and lifted the dust around her boots. Her hands tightened at her sides, knuckles white as she tried to steady herself. And the Apache's gaze never wavered, and in it she caught a spark of something she had almost forgotten. Possibility. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not for what she wasn't, but for what she could be. The auctioneer cleared his throat, struggling to hide his surprise, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. Well, seems we have a serious bidder. A widowed Apache, no less. Who'd have thought? Laughter bubbled nervously from the crowd, but it was uneasy, uncertain. No one knew how this would end. No one could predict what this choice might bring. And there she stood on the platform, caught between the judgment of the world and the unexpected attention of a man who seemed untouched by it. Her mind raced with questions. Why him? Why now? What did he see in her that everyone else had overlooked? She could feel the eyes of the town boring into her, waiting, wondering, and yet for the first time, she was not just waiting, she was hoping. The Apache raised a hand slightly, a subtle gesture that somehow carried weight beyond the simple act of bidding. The young woman held her breath, the world around her narrowing to the space between them. The air felt electric, as if something long dormant had suddenly stirred, something that could change the course of her life forever. And then the auctioneer's hammer hovered, suspended in the air, as though the next sound would decide more than just the outcome of the sale. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and sage. And the crowd leaned forward, sensing the story that was about to unfold. The young woman's pulse raced. She had been unwanted, overlooked, judged for the very body that carried her spirit, and now everything hung in a delicate balance. One choice, one unexpected step, could turn everything upside down, or perhaps give her a chance she had never dared to imagine. And just like that, the auction yard held its breath, waiting to see who would win, who would falter, and what future might be written in the dusty footprints of that old American town. The young woman's eyes met the Apache's once more, and in that look, a promise or a challenge lingered. Unresolved, leaving the rest of the town and the story itself suspended, trembling on the edge of what was yet to come. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the boards, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. No one spoke, no one moved. And in that silence, the question remained. Who would dare to claim the young woman, and what would it cost to do so? The young woman's hands were clammy as the crowd held its breath, their murmurs fading into a heavy silence that seemed to press down on the auction yard. She glanced at the Apache once more, trying to read the expression on his face. There was a quiet intensity there, a steadiness that unsettled her as much as it comforted her. He did not seem concerned with the judgment of the others, the whispers or the sideways glances. In that moment, she realized that he belonged to a world entirely different from theirs, a world built on survival, skill, and an unshakable sense of self. As the auctioneer hesitated, uncertain whether to lower the hammer or continue, the young woman's mind began to drift, filling the silence with memories that she had tried to bury. She had grown up on the edges of the town, in a small cabin that smelled of pine and coal smoke. Her mother had died when she was just a girl, leaving her father to work the land until his hands were cracked and worn. He had been kind but practical, and she remembered the way he had looked at her sometimes, not with judgment, but with the quiet resignation of someone who had seen life's hard truths early. School had been a place of constant whispers. Children could be cruel, and she had learned to make herself small, to avoid attention whenever possible. Her weight had always been a target, a reason for others to exclude her, to mock her in ways both subtle and sharp. Yet she had also learned resilience, the kind that comes from surviving repeated rejection and finding ways to stand tall despite it. Her mother's voice, remembered in quiet moments, had told her that strength could take many forms, and that beauty was not always meant for the shallow eyes of the world. The Apache's presence reminded her of those lessons, though in a way she did not fully understand. He seemed to see her, really see her, in a way that no one else had. There was a calm authority in him, a sense that he had weathered storms far greater than this dusty auction yard. Rumors about him had floated through town for years. Some said he had been a scout, guiding travelers through the harshest stretches of desert and prairie. Others whispered about a life filled with loss of a family torn apart by disease and raids, leaving him a widower at an age when most men were still learning to measure their place in the world. His reputation had always been both feared and respected, and now, standing in the sun, he was about to challenge every expectation the townspeople had carried with them for years. The young woman's pulse quickened as she remembered the first time she had seen him outside of town. She had been fetching water at the edge of the creek, and he had emerged from the shadows of the trees, a silent observer. His presence had been startling at first, but not threatening. It simply nodded, tipped the brim of his hat, and moved on. Something about the way he carried himself, the steady rhythm of his movements, the quiet confidence had stayed with her. Now, as he stood at the edge of the auction platform, that same calm, measured energy seemed to radiate outward, cutting through the haze of judgment that had clung to her all her life. The auctioneer finally swallowed and cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the scene. "Well, looks like we might have a serious bid, folks." His voice wavered as he looked from the Apache to the young woman and back again. The crowd shuffled, uneasy, unsure how to respond. Some of the older men muttered to each other, voices tinged with disbelief. A widowed Apache. For her, seems an odd match, don't it? Others exchanged glances, the lines of prejudice etched deeply into their faces. The young woman tried not to let it show, but her heart raced. She had been invisible for so long, overlooked and dismissed, that the idea of someone stepping forward, of someone seeing value in her, felt almost unreal. Yet fear tangled with hope, reminding her that this sudden attention could bring consequences she had never imagined. She knew little of the Apache, nothing of his life beyond the scattered stories she had heard, and yet she sensed that choosing him, even unknowingly, might pull her into a world both dangerous and fascinating. As the auctioneer fumbled with his papers, trying to act busy while clearly unsure what to do next, the Apache finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, carrying over the murmurs of the crowd with a weight that demanded attention. "I'll take her," he said simply. The words were not boastful, not loud. They were deliberate, clear, and final. The young woman's stomach twisted. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of surprise and disbelief. Whispers erupted like sparks in dry grass, some full of judgment, others of curiosity, and a few tinged with admiration for the man who had dared to step where none would. The auctioneer's hammer trembled in his hand. He looked between the two, uncertain, caught between protocol and the unexpected turn of events. Finally, he brought it down with a sharp bang, as if the sound could solidify a reality none of them had foreseen. The young woman blinked, unsure whether to breathe or flee, but the Apache's steady gaze held her in place, quiet and commanding. She realized in that suspended moment that her life was about to change, though she had no idea how or if she was ready for it. After the auction ended, the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a mixture of curiosity and unease. Some shook their heads, whispering about the oddity of the pairing, while others lingered. Unable to pull themselves away from the unfolding story, the young woman stepped down from the platform, her legs trembling under her. And for the first time in her life, she felt eyes on her that did not judge. The Apache waited, silent, giving her a space to adjust to the new reality that had suddenly landed at her feet. He did not speak again immediately, letting her come to terms with the shift. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, carrying the resonance of someone accustomed to thinking before acting. "You have nothing to fear from me," he said, though the words carried weight beyond reassurance. They spoke of understanding, of experience, of someone who had seen the world's harshness and survived it. The young woman nodded, uncertain whether to trust him or the flicker of hope that had been awakened within her chest. As they left the auction yard together, the town seemed to hold its breath. Windows shuttered against the late afternoon sun, doors swung closed behind whispering neighbors, and the clatter of the wind through the dry streets seemed louder than usual. She noticed how the Apache moved, careful, deliberate, aware of every sound and shadow. There was a history in the way he carried himself, a past that had sharpened him into someone who could face the world without flinching, yet still recognize the fragility of others. She wondered about the life he had led, the losses he had endured, the solitude that had shaped him into the man standing beside her. And as they walked, side by side but separated by the unspoken tension of the unknown, she realized that her own story, the years of struggle, of being unseen, surviving on determination and quiet resilience, was about to intertwine with his in ways she could not predict. The road ahead was uncertain, the shadows long and deep, and the questions multiplied with every step. What did it mean to be chosen in a world that had spent so long ignoring her? Much of the Apache's life would intersect with hers, and what challenges awaited beyond the edges of town? Every whisper of wind, every shifting shadow seemed to hint at danger and discovery in equal measure. The young woman felt both fear and anticipation, a fragile mixture that made her pulse race and her thoughts spin. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun had dipped close to the horizon, turning the sky to streaks of orange and crimson. The Apache stopped and turned to look at her, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. It was not a smile of amusement, but of recognition, as if he understood something about her that no one else ever had. She met his gaze, feeling the weight of his understanding settle over her like a shield against the judgmental world they had left behind. Yet even in that quiet moment, the tension of the auction yard lingered, unresolved. The whispers of the crowd, the suspicion of those who had watched them, and the uncertainty of the path ahead pressed in on her. She knew that stepping into this new chapter with the Apache meant leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe, and venturing into a life that was as unpredictable as it was compelling. The night air grew cooler, carrying the scent of sage and distant fires. The young woman shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization that she was standing at the edge of something vast, something unknown. The Apache regarded her silently, his eyes reflecting both the hardships of the past and the possibilities of the future. And in that quiet, suspended moment, she understood that their journey together had begun, but the road ahead was still shrouded in mystery, danger, and promise. Every step they took further into the fading light carried with it questions that had no immediate answers. What would the town say? Who would try to interfere? And most importantly, how would she find her place in a world that had spent so long telling her she didn't belong? The answers were out there somewhere, hidden in the miles of dust-swept plains and the uncharted paths beyond, waiting for her to discover. And so they walked, the young woman and the widowed Apache, side by side, into a horizon filled with uncertainty and suspense. Each footfall echoed with possibility, each glance shared a silent understanding, and each moment built on the tension left unresolved from the auction yard. Their story was only beginning, and the questions hanging between them promised a journey that would challenge everything she had ever known about courage, survival, and the power of being truly seen. The sun had fully disappeared behind the distant hills by the time they left the town behind, leaving the sky streaked with deep purple and gold. The young woman adjusted the straps of her worn satchel, her thoughts a tangled mess of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. Each step she took beside the Apache seemed heavier than the last, not because of distance, but because of the weight of the unknown. She had never traveled far from the edges of the town before, never dared to imagine a life outside the narrow world of judgment and expectation. And yet here she was, walking with a man whose presence seemed to open doors she didn't even know existed. The Apache broke the silence first, his voice low and deliberate, carrying over the cool evening air. "You're strong," he said, not as praise, but as a statement. "More than you think. That's why I chose you." The young woman's stomach fluttered, half with pride and half with uncertainty. Strength was something she had always measured in quiet resilience, in surviving the mockery of her peers and the cold indifference of strangers. But she had never expected it to be recognized, or to matter to someone like him. "I don't know if she started, then faltered, unsure what word could capture the mixture of doubt and hope inside her. The Apache didn't interrupt. He had a patience honed by years alone on the plains, and he waited for her to find the words she could not yet speak. Instead, he scanned the horizon, his eyes alert to the shadows between the hills and the faint rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. Every movement, every sound, seemed to carry a meaning he understood in ways she could not. As darkness settled around them, the young woman began to notice the subtle signs of the Apache's life. The worn leather of his boots, the careful maintenance of his gear, the way his hands rested lightly on the straps of his rifle, everything spoke of experience, of survival. She realized that this man had endured more than most could imagine. He carried a past marked by loss and solitude, and yet he moved forward without bitterness. That realization made her feel both cautious and inspired, wondering what lessons she might learn if she stayed by his side. Their journey was quiet at first. It's the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the dry earth and the distant calls of night creatures. But as the stars emerged, tiny sparks against the dark sky, the young woman's mind wandered back to the town they had left. She imagined the whispers, the judgment, the way people had watched her as if she were an object to be owned rather than a person with thoughts and dreams. And then she thought about the Apache, the calm way he had acted despite it all. There was something about him that seemed to defy the world's rules, and she wondered if following him meant stepping into a life that had rules she did not yet understand. The Apache eventually spoke again, telling her stories of the land they traveled through, of the hidden springs and safe paths few knew. His words painted a picture of freedom and danger intertwined, of a world both beautiful and unforgiving. As he spoke, she began to notice the rhythm of his stories, the way each tale carried a lesson without ever feeling like a lesson at all. It was then that she realized she had been living in a very small world, one defined by fear and judgment, and that stepping into his world might force her to grow in ways she had never imagined. The next morning, the young woman woke to find the Apache already preparing their makeshift camp for the day. His movements were efficient, deliberate, and almost silent, as if he had lived in the wilderness long enough to move without disturbing the land itself. Watched him quietly, feeling a mixture of awe and nervousness. This life was nothing like the town she had known. There were no rules of propriety, no stairs to avoid, no expectations to measure herself against. Instead, there were dangers she had never faced and skills she had never learned. As they continued on the trail, the tension of the auction yard lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that leaving the town behind was not the end of scrutiny, but the beginning of a different kind of challenge. People would talk, rumors would spread, and she wondered if her family or what remained of her old community would ever forgive her for stepping outside the roles they had assigned. And more than that, she wondered what the Apache expected of her, and whether she could meet it. During one rest by a shaded creek, she tried to ask him about his past, about the life that had shaped him into someone who could act with such calm authority in a world full of judgment and danger. But he only shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Some stories aren't for telling yet," he said. "They'll come when the time is right." The young woman felt a chill. She sensed there was pain and loss in his history, but he chose to carry it quietly, like the weight of the land itself. And in that silence, she realized that their journey together would be as much about discovering each other as it would be about surviving the world around them. Meanwhile, far behind in the town, whispers had begun to form into a quiet storm. Merchants who had attended the auction spoke of the strange choice of the widowed Apache, some scoffing, others intrigued. The local women, who had long measured themselves against the narrow standards of beauty and propriety, whispered in corners, their words sharp and judgmental. "Why him?" they asked each other. "Why her?" The question carried suspicion, envy, and disbelief. The young woman's absence became a story in itself, a story that grew taller with each retelling, twisting the events of the auction into something larger than life. Unbeknownst to her, a small group of men had begun to plan. They were not cruel in the open sense, but they resented the disruption of their expectations. The idea that a man like the Apache might choose someone who had always been overlooked struck at their sense of order. They whispered in the saloons and behind shutters, plotting to follow or challenge the pair if necessary. And though she did not know it yet, her journey would not be free of conflict from those who could not understand the choices that had been made. Back on the trail, the young woman began to notice subtle changes in the Apache's demeanor. At times he seemed alert, scanning the horizon with sharp intensity, and she realized that danger might lurk in ways she could not predict. There were rustling sounds in the brush, distant hoofbeats that might belong to travelers or predators, and shadows that shifted unnaturally under the waning moon. The tension of the auction yard seemed small compared to the uncertainty of the open land, and she felt a new kind of fear take root in her chest, one that spoke of survival, vigilance, and the necessity of trust. Their conversations began to deepen, shifting from stories of the land to questions of character, courage, and past choices. The Apache asked her about her dreams, her fears, the life she had left behind. And as she answered, she realized how much she had hidden, how much of herself had been stifled by judgment and expectation. Each confession felt like a small act of rebellion, a declaration that she was more than the whispers of the town, more than the auction stage where she had been displayed. Yet, even as trust began to form between them, she could sense the unresolved tension in the Apache as well. There were nights when he would sit silently, staring into the fire, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. She wondered what haunted him, what losses he had endured that shaped him into someone capable of such calm in public yet carried storms in private. It was clear that he too carried the weight of the past, and their journey would force both of them to confront it in ways neither fully understood. As the days passed, the young woman began to notice how their survival depended on a delicate balance of skill, intuition, and patience. She learned to gather firewood efficiently, to find edible plants along the trail, and to read the subtle signs of the land that could warn of danger. The Apache guided her, but he also allowed her to make mistakes, to learn, and to grow. Every lesson carried a hidden tension. The land was unforgiving, and failure could have consequences that were permanent. The thrill of learning was tempered by the awareness that the world beyond the town was nothing like the safe, narrow streets she had known. Rumors from town continued to reach them in fragments. An occasional traveler, a note left in a way station, but none carried the comfort of home. Instead, they reminded her of the eyes that still watched, judged, and whispered. She realized that leaving town had not erased her past. It had simply placed it at a distance, a constant reminder that choices made in freedom often carry shadows behind them. And so, as they moved through the rolling plains, the tension between past and present, fear and hope, grew stronger. Every day brought challenges, unpredictable weather, hidden dangers, the need to trust in someone she barely knew. And every night, by the firelight, she felt the unresolved questions of the auction yard lingering, reminding her that their journey was only beginning. The Apache, patient and steadfast, seemed to carry his own burden, one that he was not yet ready to share. In that fragile balance of trust and uncertainty, the young woman realized that the real conflict was not just the world outside the town, but the doubts, fears, and histories that both of them carried. And while the horizon promised freedom and possibility, it also held danger, judgment, and secrets that could change everything in an instant. The land stretched out before them, beautiful and unforgiving, and each step carried them deeper into the unknown, where every choice mattered, and the resolution of the past and the promise of the future remained tantalizingly out of reach. Their story moved forward, a delicate dance of courage, suspicion, and discovery. The young woman and the widowed Apache faced not just the challenges of the land, but the challenges of understanding one another, of confronting the unspoken shadows that lingered from their pasts. And as night fell once more, the tension remained unresolved, the journey ahead uncertain, leaving every moment charged with the possibility of danger, revelation, and the shaping of a bond that neither had yet fully realized. The wind had grown colder as they moved deeper into the plains, the night stretching its shadows long and dark over the rolling hills. The young woman shivered beneath her thin cloak, but it was not just the chill that made her tense. Every rustle of brush, every crack of a distant branch, made her heart jump. She had never imagined that life beyond the town could feel so alive, so charged with unseen danger. The Apache walked beside her with unshakable confidence, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand resting lightly on the worn leather of his rifle. "I don't like it out here," she admitted, her voice low, barely more than a whisper against the wind. "It feels too quiet." The Apache did not turn to look at her, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "Quiet isn't always safe," he said. "It's when the land is quiet that you need to be most alert. That's when trouble hides." She nodded, trying to steady her trembling hands. Every lesson he had taught her, every subtle warning, now seemed to carry more weight. The land was vast, beautiful, and unforgiving, and she had only glimpsed its surface. She knew instinctively that the next days would test them both in ways neither had expected. By midday, the sun had risen high, burning the frost off the ground and revealing tracks in the soft earth. "Apache?" The Apache knelt, inspecting them with practiced precision. "We're not alone," he murmured, almost to himself. The young woman crouched beside him, trying to make sense of the marks. They were fresh, and small hoofprints ran parallel to broken twigs, suggesting someone or something had passed through very recently. Her pulse quickened. "Do you think it's men from town?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The thought that someone from the auction might have followed them gnawed at her. The town had not forgotten, she realized. Some people would never forgive the choice that had been made, the audacity of a widowed Apache claiming what others deemed worthless. "Could be," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Or it could be worse. We'll know soon enough." His words were calm, but there was an edge beneath them, a tension that made her stomach tighten. The Apache's life had been shaped by danger, by knowing when to trust the quiet of the land and when to fear it. And now she was learning that caution could be the difference between life and death. They moved forward carefully, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. Every step was deliberate, calculated. The young woman noticed how he communicated without words, a tilt of his head, a subtle gesture, and she realized how much of survival depended on reading the smallest signals. Her own senses sharpened, nerves stretching taut against the unknown. By late afternoon, the horizon darkened with storm clouds. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the scent of rain. They sought shelter beneath a cluster of rock formations, the Apache moving ahead first to check for danger. She followed, careful not to make a sound. His movements were fluid, practice something born of years alone in the wild. She felt a mixture of awe and anxiety. This man who had chosen her, who had seen something in her that no one else did, was capable of navigating the world in ways she could barely imagine. As they settled into a small crevice, the young woman glanced at him. "You've been alone a long time, haven't you?" she asked quietly. He did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "Long enough," he said finally. "Long enough to know what matters and what doesn't." His words were simple, but they carried weight. She sensed there were stories behind them, losses, betrayals, dangers faced alone, but he chose to share them sparingly. She understood that part of his strength came from holding pieces of his past close, like a weapon or a shield. Night fell fast, darker than she expected. The storm rumbled in the distance, and the wind moaned through the rocks. She tried to make a fire, but the Apache stopped her. "Not yet," he said. "Fire draws attention. We wait." The young woman's fingers itched to touch the dry wood, to summon comfort in the flickering glow of flames. But she obeyed, feeling the tension of the night press closer. Every sound seemed magnified, the distant howl of a coyote, the snap of a branch in the wind, the creak of the rocks underfoot. It was impossible not to feel vulnerable, to realize just how small they were in the vast expanse of the plains. Hours passed, each moment thick with suspense. Shadows moved in strange ways, and she found herself glancing at every sound, every flicker of movement. Her imagination conjured threats she could not name, dangers that might leap from the darkness. The Apache remained silent, his calm exterior belying the sharp awareness that ran through him. She began to understand that his confidence did not come from fearlessness, but from experience, from knowing how to survive when the world wanted to swallow you whole. Suddenly, a shout carried on the wind a voice she recognized faintly, hoarse and urgent. Her pulse surged. "Men from town," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. The Apache's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe someone else entirely. Stay close." He moved with astonishing speed and precision, leading her deeper into the rocks, into a narrow passage where she could barely see the sky. The wind buffeted them, carrying the scent of rain and the faint tang of fear. Every step felt precarious, and she realized that the land itself was an enemy now, unpredictable and dangerous. She stumbled once, nearly losing her footing, and the Apache caught her hand, steadying her with a grip that was firm yet gentle. "You have to trust me," he said. "Everything depends on it." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Trust had never been easy for her, not after years of being judged, ignored, and dismissed. Yet she felt a strange certainty in his words, a thread of confidence she could cling to even as danger pressed close from every side. The shouting grew louder, closer. She could make out fragments of words, threats, commands, the sound of boots pounding the ground. Tension coiled inside her, making it hard to breathe. She pressed herself against the rocks, her body shaking, her ears straining for any sign of what lay ahead. The Apache moved silently, leading her toward a narrow opening between boulders, a hidden path that twisted into the darkness. "They're after us?" she said in a whisper, her fear breaking through. "Maybe," he said, his voice calm but taut. "Or maybe they're after something else. That's the problem with men who chase shadows. They don't know what they want until it's too late." They paused in the shadows, listening. The shouting had grown distant, yet the tension lingered, palpable and suffocating. She realized that the world they had entered was far more dangerous than the auction yard, far more unforgiving than the judgment of townspeople. And yet there was a thrill in it, a pulse of life she had never felt before, sense that every moment mattered, that every choice carried consequence. As the night deepened, the storm broke. Rain lashed against the rocks, cold and relentless. The young woman pressed herself close to the Apache, shivering, but he did not slow. "Keep moving," he said. "We're almost there." Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she followed, trusting him, even as the unknown pressed in from all sides. Every turn of the path, every shadow that shifted in the rain, made her heart pound faster. She realized that the conflict she had faced in the auction yard, the whispers, the judgment, the feeling of being unwanted, was nothing compared to what lay ahead. Here in the wild, survival depended on courage, on skill, and on the ability to act when fear threatened to freeze you. Finally, they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a valley below. The storm had eased slightly, leaving mist curling around the rocks. From above, she could see movement in the distance, figures moving cautiously, searching, unsure where to find them. The Apache crouched beside her, silent, his gaze fixed on the shadowed valley. "They're out there," she whispered, gripping his arm. He nodded, "And we're up here. They won't find us if we stay sharp, but we have to be ready. Things are about to get complicated." Her pulse raced as she realized the full weight of their situation. The auction yard, the town's judgment, the whispers and ridicule, they were now distant shadows compared to the immediate threat below. The young woman had never imagined that her life could change so dramatically in a single week, and yet here she was, standing on the edge of danger. Beside a man she barely knew but could not stop trusting. The rain began again, lighter this time, and the night seemed to hold its breath. The figures in the valley moved cautiously, unaware that they were being watched. The young woman felt the tension coil inside her like a living thing, stretching every nerve to the limit. The Apache's hand brushed hers, a small gesture, but one that grounded her in the moment, reminding her that they faced the unknown together. And in that silence, in the storm-swept darkness, she realized that the climax of their journey, the moment when every choice, every risk, every fear would collide, was almost upon them. The horizon was uncertain, the dangers real, and the resolution still out of reach. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every glance a warning, every whisper of wind a reminder that the world beyond the auction yard was vast, unforgiving, and full of suspense. The night held them suspended, the tension unbearable yet electrifying. The young woman and the widowed Apache crouched together, waiting, ready. Knowing that soon the next step would decide everything, the first light of dawn broke through the lingering mist, casting a soft golden glow over the valley below. The young woman stirred beside the Apache, her muscles stiff and aching from the long night, but her heart was steadier than it had been in days. The storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean and glimmering with dew. The figures from the valley were gone, vanished into the shadows of the hills as silently as they had appeared. For the first time since leaving the town, a sense of calm settled over her, though it was tempered by the awareness of how close danger had been. The Apache rose first, stretching his long limbs with a fluid grace that reminded her of his quiet strength. He surveyed the valley carefully, taking in every detail, the bends of the creek, the rise of the rocks, the paths the unseen figures might have taken. Then he turned to her, his expression softer than it had been through the tension of the night. "You handled yourself well," he said simply. "Fear can make people freeze, but you didn't. You moved when it mattered." She swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never known. For so long, she had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. And yet here she was, surviving the unknown, standing beside a man who had chosen her, when the rest of the world would not. The thought warmed her, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that she was more than what others said she was. As they continued along the path, the Apache shared small pieces of his story tales of life on the plains, of losses endured and lessons learned. He spoke sparingly, but each word carried meaning, giving her a glimpse of the man behind the quiet strength. She listened closely, realizing that his past, like hers, had shaped him in ways that were neither simple nor painless. And in listening, she felt a growing bond between them. One built on shared experience, trust, and the quiet understanding that life was fragile and precious. By midday, they had reached a sheltered canyon where the sun warmed the stones and a small spring bubbled in the center. The Apache knelt to drink, his reflection rippling in the clear water. She followed, dipping her hands into the cool stream and letting the water wash away some of the tension she had carried for days. It felt like the first moment of real peace she had known since the auction. Sitting beside him, she finally found the courage to speak about the town, about the auction, about the whispers and the judgment she had endured. "I never thought anyone would see me for who I really am," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "All my life, people have only seen what I'm not, never what I could be." The Apache nodded, eyes thoughtful. "The world is full of people who can't see beyond what they want to believe. But that doesn't mean you're not worth noticing. It only means you have to find those who do." His words struck her. A quiet affirmation that the struggles she had endured were not a measure of her value, but a reflection of the world around her. Hours passed and they shared more stories, both of survival and of small joys, a rare bird nesting near the spring, the scent of wildflowers in hidden valleys, the way the wind could sound like music when it moved through the canyons. Each detail was a reminder that life continued beyond judgment, that beauty and danger existed side by side, and that she had the strength to navigate both. In the late afternoon, they reached the edge of a plateau that overlooked a distant town, smaller and quieter than the one she had left. She realized how far they had traveled, how much had changed in so little time. She looked at the Apache, her heart full of gratitude and awe. "You've shown me a world I never knew existed," she said softly. "A world where I can matter, where I can survive and even thrive." He gave a faint smile, the first full smile she had seen from him. "And you've shown me that there's more than just survival," he said. "There's courage in people who endure, and hope in people who refuse to be broken. You carry both." As night fell once more, they made camp near the plateau, the stars above bright and endless. The young woman felt a peace she had never known, a balance between vigilance and trust, danger and possibility. She realized that the past, the auction, the town, the whispers no longer held power over her. She had faced fear, survived it, and learned to trust herself and the Apache beside her. The Apache spoke again, quietly, as the firelight flickered across their faces. "We're not done yet," he said. "The world is full of challenges, but you've proven that you can face them. That's what matters." She nodded, understanding that life would never be free of conflict, but that the strength she had discovered within herself would guide her forward. Morning came, and with it, the sense of new beginnings. The young woman felt lighter, stronger, and more certain of her place in the world. She and the Apache continued along the trail, their bond deepened by shared experience, danger, and trust. She realized that the journey had changed her. The lessons learned in fear and uncertainty were gifts she would carry forever. Weeks passed, and as they traveled, they encountered other travelers in need of help. Townsfolk, wary but curious, and landscapes both harsh and breathtaking. The young woman learned to navigate the world with confidence, drawing strength from the Apache's guidance while trusting her own instincts. She discovered joy in small victories, resilience in moments of difficulty, and courage in the face of uncertainty. Eventually, they returned to a small town, not the one she had left, but a place where life moved slowly and people were willing to see beyond appearances. The Apache and the young woman found work and purpose, contributing their skills to the community. She was no longer the girl judged for her size, but a woman respected for her courage, resourcefulness, and heart. And he, the widowed Apache, found companionship and trust in someone who had endured judgment and hardship, but had emerged stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Casting a warm glow across the town, the young woman stood beside the Apache, watching the children play and the townsfolk go about their lives. She felt a sense of completeness, a quiet satisfaction that the trials they had faced had not broken them, but had forged them into something stronger. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged," she said. "You did," he replied simply, "and you made your own way here. That's what counts." The young woman smiled, a deep, genuine smile that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with self-acceptance and resilience. She understood now that life was not about avoiding judgment, fear, or danger, but about facing them and finding strength in the process. She had been unwanted at an auction, underestimated by the world, but she had survived, learned, and discovered the value of courage, trust, and perseverance. The Apache stood beside her, steady and calm, a silent promise of partnership and protection. Together, they had faced the unknown, endured the judgment of others, and navigated a world that could have easily crushed them. And yet, here they were alive, stronger, and ready to continue their journey, whatever lay ahead. The young woman took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp evening air, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She knew that challenges would come again, that the world remained unpredictable and often harsh. But she also knew that she had discovered something invaluable, the power to survive, to trust, and to find worth in herself, no matter what others thought. As night fell over the town, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the journey they had taken and the lessons learned along the way. The young woman understood that life was not about being chosen by others, but about choosing herself, embracing her strength, finding those who saw her for who she truly was. The Apache placed a hand on her shoulder, a gentle, grounding presence. "We've come far," he said, "and we'll go farther still, together." She nodded, her heart full, her spirit lighter than it had ever been. The echoes of the auction yard, the whispers of the town, and the shadows of fear and doubt had all faded. In their place stood courage, resilience, and the quiet, unwavering strength of someone who had been overlooked but had survived, grown, and finally been seen. The story of the young woman and the widowed Apache closed not with an ending, but with a beginning promised that life, with all its danger, judgment, and uncertainty, could be met with courage, trust, and the strength to embrace the unknown. And as they watched the sun set together, the warmth of hope and possibility stretched across the horizon, leaving the audience with the memory of a journey that had transformed fear into courage, doubt into self-belief, and loneliness into connection. The world was vast and unpredictable, but they had learned that together they could face it. The young woman, once unwanted and underestimated, had found her place not in the eyes of others, but in the courage she carried, the trust she gave, and the unwavering strength that had always been inside her. The Apache, too, had found a companion, someone who understood loss, resilience, and the value of seeing the world and each other with honesty. As night settled fully over the plains, the fire crackled gently. The stars reflected in the quiet water nearby, and the wind whispered softly through the canyons. It was a world full of challenges, yes, but also full of possibility, and for the first time, the young woman felt that she could meet whatever came next with courage, hope, and the knowledge that she was seen, valued, and capable. And with that, their story born from judgment, shaped by fear, and strengthened through survival, found its peaceful moment, leaving behind the lessons of resilience, self-worth, and the courage to embrace life's unknown paths.